What's up, grinders? Welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be watching this video from one word at a time, testing the 20 times vocab threshold. Now, I've heard about this many times before. I've actually heard it as 16 times, but the assumption is that if you hear a word 20 times in different contexts, you're going to remember the word. And in fact, I didn't originally hear it in, the context of the language learner. I heard it in the context of marketing. Like if you see a brand name 20 times or 16 times in different contexts, you will remember it. It will pop up in your head. So I'm kind of curious to see, because he says he's testing this, how his test goes.
After learning that it takes 20 exposures to learn a new word in a foreign language.
Also, I don't know where this 2016 comes from. I'm sure there's like some specific experiment out there, but I've heard the 16. He's heard the 20. The number seems to be around that range.
And then modeling what that would look like for reading and for watching TV, I put my money where my mouth is and tried it out. I did a 7-day challenge trying to learn Polish using only Polish language YouTube videos and then tested myself at the end. Here's what happened. I chose Polish because given my family history, I may want to learn it at some point, and it also has most of the same letters as the English language.
Okay, so based on the fact that he's watching content, doesn't speak the language, but he's also got the subtitles in the language, so in Polish, that's not quite the same as the experiment I'm running on my channel with Dreaming Spanish and the ALG, Automatic Language Growth Method. So it seems like what he's going to do, and he's probably going to clarify this, but I want to show you guys the difference between the two experiments, is that he's going to be watching content with subtitles, and then he's going to be trying to absorb the language, acquire aspects of the language via doing that. Well, I'm doing with Dreaming Spanish and, the ALG method, basically just listening to content, no subtitles. So I'm narrowed down to listening. He's going to be narrowed down to both listening and seeing or reading.
Which meaning that it would be a little bit more understandable. I picked the Easy Polish YouTube channel as...
Okay, right there, you can see, he's actually got English subtitles. I reckon that's going to throw him off. I made a video about subtitles just recently. I actually said you shouldn't have English subtitles up, because what's going to happen is you're going to focus on the English subtitles. I'm curious to see if that impacts his experiment in any way.
Source for all of my content, because everything they make is in Polish, but they also have Polish and English subtitles under every video. So on the first day, I opened YouTube and began watching. Śniadania, we said is breakfast. So kurczę. Okay, so kurczę always has something to do with a tomato. There's so many consonants.
I'm also curious to know, maybe he'll mention, but here you can hear him basically shadowing words as they're popping up. I'm assuming. Maybe this is just for YouTube. Maybe he didn't do that at all. But that adds another component to it.
So many little flicks on each of the letters. Like I'm disrespecting so many Polish people. Okay. As I watched, I learned a number of things. First, it was silly things like the fact that Polish sounds like Russian spoken in Italian. And then I learned that even with all of the enthusiasm and misplaced confidence of a not yet YouTuber, conversation in a foreign language is way too fast-paced to just sit back and get anything meaningful from, even if you have subtitles. For the challenge, I chose 7 videos from their channel. The first 4 days were simpler videos about a day in the life or explaining individual words in Polish. And the last 3 days, I watched their on-the-street interviews with random Polish people about birthdays, relaxation, and famous scientists.
Okay, before I let him get into the results, I'm going to tell you what I think the results are based on my ALG experiment. So I've done like 850 hours up to this point of watching Spanish, no subtitles, no grammar study, no word lookups, just watching level appropriate content, okay? I'm gonna say right now, 20 exposures is definitely not enough for the vast majority of words. In fact, maybe even hundreds of exposures is not enough. However, there will be instances where you get 1 or 2 exposures and you acquire a word like that, okay? But in other cases, you're gonna need hundreds, maybe even more. And the reason I say this is, well, obviously based on my own experience, but what I think happens is that you actually only really acquire words that are obvious, obviously, from context what they are, but are also very important to the content. So to give you an example, I must have seen the word nail, as in the nail that you stick into wood, hundreds of times, okay, during my 850 hours of content. Recently, I watched a series where I think it was for the game, the two of us or something like that. It's a co-op game where 2 people are playing together and you need to co-op and work together, okay? And in that game, there's a time where you need to use nails and you shoot them into the wall, and it's a part of the gameplay, okay? Now, they don't say the word nail very often, but they say it in very, very obvious context, and also it's kind of crucial to, that content, that after watching that, I now know what it is. Like, it's just obvious to me. But I must have heard it hundreds of times before now, because I've seen random videos where people are doing woodworking with nails and stuff like that, but they've got lots of different instruments, and it just wasn't really needed for that content to understand, like plenty of other times in gaming context. But for some reason, during that game, watching that game in context, the word just stuck. But for other words, I've definitely heard them hundreds of times. No idea. No idea.
I knew that I would need a way to track the number of exposures I had to each word, and also what my vocabulary and ability to understand Polish at the end of the challenge would be.
I'm liking this. I'm liking how data-driven he's getting.
With that in mind, I came up with 3 ways of evaluating my skills at the end of the challenge. First, and most importantly, do I know all of the words that I saw at least 20 times?
Okay, my thoughts are a couple of words. Yes, he will know, or maybe he can guess. But the majority know.
Second, are there any words that I picked up on that I saw less than 20 times? And third, if after the challenge I watch a video in Polish, how much can I get out of it? Carrying out this challenge was tricky because in order to come up with my final exam, I needed to know which words were mentioned more than 20 times across all the videos that I'd watched. From work I had done for previous videos, I had code to process the transcripts for these videos in Polish without exposing me to the language itself. Thanks to this code, that means that before I started the challenge, I was able to come up with the test materials themselves with very, very limited exposure to Polish and certainly no translation between English and Polish. Even in the first video, a few things began to click. The first were English loanwords to Polish that
Oh yeah, I should have mentioned that. Yeah, loan words will click pretty much instantly. You won't be able to reproduce them, but you'll understand them, as long as they are somewhat similar to the language. This happened with my Spanish experiment. Anything Esperanto, anything English, you know, that's related to Spanish, instantly. I've mentioned in previous videos, like, I was watching a documentary in Spanish. I'd never heard the word for dragonfly in Spanish. They said the word for dragonfly even before they showed a dragonfly on screen. I knew what it was because it was just basically the Esperanto word.
immediately made sense. Then I also noticed some words that I could figure out because I knew German. And then I began to recognize some of the repeat words in Polish. Just like English, Polish also has some one-letter words, usually for prepositions. Those obvious, simple words were the first ones that were recognizable, even if they didn't stick. That
is very different. Okay, so with my ALG experiment, those simple words actually took some of them I haven't even acquired yet, but like many of them took hundreds of hours to acquire, but I'm only listening while he's also watching. So I guess seeing them written, it probably helps you acquire them way faster than just listening to them.
said,
I guess because like when your brain's just listening, it doesn't know word boundaries, but when it's written, you see space boundaries. So you can easily create that connection.
I also began to recognize longer words as well. As the challenge continued, I also noticed a few things that challenged the assumptions that I had used in previous videos. For example, let's say I watch a video about Polish scientists. The word scientist shows up 10 times and the word scientists shows up 12 times. In English, those words sound similar enough that my gut says that you should just say it's as if you've seen the word scientist 22 times.
Yeah, I would count that as one word. Just because of, well, for one, it's like, well, okay. My first assumption is you should count them as one word, but it really depends. Does this language have a regular system of conjugation, plurality, all this type of things? If it doesn't, I wouldn't. Or if it has a lot of exceptions to the rules, I wouldn't.
And boom, now you know the word. This is an example.
Which means there's no real clean way of defining this, but like, you gotta draw a line somewhere.
Example of a lemmatization or grouping variations of the same word. But as someone who doesn't know Polish, it's not obvious that the words for scientists and scientists are actually related. And
then in that case, you probably shouldn't.
And for a separate example, what do we do about verbs? If you have at least past, present, future, and imperative, and each of these has 6 conjugations,
So I would say if it's regular and you've studied the system beforehand, count it as one word. If it's not regular, and you definitely haven't studied the system beforehand, count them as separate words. Because you're trying to learn via exposure, and your brain doesn't know that there's a system at play here.
Trying to count up to the 20 exposures you need, if you see each one of these conjugations, then you've reached that 20 limit. And even though I watched an entire video on the Polish word to have, it doesn't mean that I know the word. In ideal language learning, I would understand the connection between all forms of a word and the meaning of the word. In actual language learning, especially as a beginner, assuming I even catch the word, I care about more than just meaning. Spelling, pronunciation, intonation, and grouping of words also matters. There are times where you will watch or read intensively, paying attention to the meaning and all of these other things for every single word. But there are other times where you just want to cover ground and enjoy casual time with your target language, letting your subconscious do the observing and processing of most of this information. As I continue through the days of watching Polish videos, I experienced that if we're trying to boil down language learning to numbers, how we engage with our target language really matters. Looking at the transcripts for the 7 videos I watched for my challenge, if we lemmatize and only use the root words, my vocabulary should be 64 words. But if we don't...
Okay, 64 words because you've seen them 20 times. Ain't no way in hell, I guarantee you're not. Then again, having subtitles might improve that a little bit. Especially for those little words. That's very different to just listening.
Lemmatize and just leave each word as it is, my vocabulary should only be 39 words. As I kept watching videos, I had to suppress a very specific urge. One way to increase the number of exposures that you have to a word in a language is to use note cards or flashcards in a system like Anki. But because I wanted this challenge to focus very much on the content and the input, I suppressed the urge to make Anki cards for all of the Polish words I was seeing. So I kept watching, and after a week I watched all 7 videos, and it was test day. Since I'm such a beginner, the format for the test was very straightforward. I had a list of Polish words and I just had to write the English translation of those words. The test included all of the words that I had seen more than 20 times, and then also a control group of just some random words that I had been exposed
Okay, I like how he's doing this. Like, he's going full science mode. This is really cool.
along the way, but hadn't seen 20 times. Of the 39 words that I was exposed to 20 or more times, I only knew 7 of them. That's a dismal 18%.
That's what I assumed. So even having subtitles up doesn't help. Then again, he also had English subtitles up. I wish he did the experiment without English subtitles, in all honesty.
Why? What I find interesting, though, is that of the other random words that I included in the test, I knew 6 of the 54, which is 11% of them. That means that I picked up other, less common words along the way. Okay, so
Maybe they were very important to the context, as I was saying earlier.
the written portion of the test did not go well. After the written test, I opened up a video from the Easy Polish YouTube channel and blocked the English
Also, he does do this. Oh, okay.
subtitles. And yes, this is less objective, but I can confidently say that I understood next to nothing. Why?
This is perfectly in line with what I was saying with my subtitle video, which was, funnily enough, a little bit controversial. You may not think you're relying on the subtitles in your native language, but you are. That's, like, he went from, what was it, 11% picking up to, like, nothing? It makes a big difference. Your brain is focused on that English. It's not paying attention anymore.
Recognized a solid number of words and could pick out the English or German loanwords, but the pacing was too fast and I had such a small foundation in Polish that the whole experience was disheartening, to say the least. The main redeeming factor here is those common words that I should have known when I took the test generally aren't critical to the message of the sentence itself and are more structural. So as I was watching...
Which is why I also say if you go study freaking frequency lists, those words will be the most common, but they will not help you much in learning the language because you're not getting anything that's important.
Those aren't what I was paying attention to within most sentences. And the way that I set up the test only included exposure to individual words completely out of context, which is very different from the watching experience. Okay, so this has been enlightening. Reflecting on the experience, there are plenty of other points that I'm going to continue to explore in other videos. First, a 7-day challenge is a ridiculously short amount of time to try and test this out, and even if that 20 exposure rule applies at all levels. I could have also watched more videos per day, since the 7 videos I watched only totaled about 1 hour of content in Polish, and though I spent close...
Bro, imagine if I did my Dreaming Spanish experiment, but I kept a record of every single video, ran all those subtitles through, and then every 50 hours, I also did this. Like, I did a test to see how much I recognize. Holy shit, that would be an insane experiment. That would give some serious data, though.
To 2 hours if you include the pausing and the lookups, though I didn't repeat anything. I may do this again as a 30-day challenge, though, like I mentioned before, I want to include Anki into that to really accelerate the learning.
Yeah, but that kind of defeats the purpose, like, of this type of experiment, because I'm more curious about how much you actually acquire from just the immersion side of things as opposed to, you know, dedicated study. The reason why I care about that, guys, is because I want to know how much you actually acquire during immersion as opposed to how much you sharpen. So for me, I'm starting to think the more and more I go down this path that immersion is like when you sharpen the knife, but study is when you actually build the knife. In a way, like, maybe that's a terrible analogy. So study is when you actually get what you need, but you don't really know how to use it yet, or you haven't got the flexibility to use or understand it yet. And then when you immerse, that's when you really sharpen in on things. And like the two work hand in hand. And you can do either or without the other, but you're really like disabling yourself in a lot of ways. Because if you just do the study without the immersion, you kind of have like a theoretical understanding of these words, but you've never actually utilized them, okay? But if you do just the immersion without the study, then it takes for ages to try and figure out those individual words and then eventually sharpen them.
I also want to explore more when it comes to reading versus watching versus listening. My gut says that reading is probably the most effective if we're looking at one exposure to a word, but if we look at the number of words acquired versus the time spent on an activity, you encounter so many more words per hour when it comes to watching and listening. Another lesson for me was that if you've ever played air hockey, then you're familiar with the concept of an elastic collision, where two perfectly hard things collide, but no energy is lost. With many words in Polish, that's how I felt. I encountered them, but then they bounced off me without leaving any impression, so it's hard to say.
Yeah, I'm thinking, Straight up, you need hundreds of exposures for most words. And even then, some of them will not stick until it's really, really important to the context.
That they should be counted towards the 20 exposures. Helpful friction is one key ingredient when it comes to language learning, though you also do want to balance efficiency. You want to encounter a word, engage with it enough so that it sticks, and then move on. But you don't want to spend a half hour learning every word. And the last lesson that this challenge reminded me of was how humbling language learning can be, whether you're...
To give you a good example, okay? The word for yesterday in Spanish. I did a Spanish test for all you guys as well, like to watch. It was quite fun. And after 850 hours... I didn't recognize the word yesterday in that video, but the guy who was making that video was speaking Spanish from mainland Spain. And then I was literally watching a video, I think it might have been from not from Dreaming Spanish, actually it might have been. I can't remember. It was from somewhere, but it was in the Argentinian accent, which is the accent I've been heavily focused on. And when they said yesterday, I instantly recognized it. So it's like, it's not even just like variations of the word, you know, and how it conjugates. It could also be accent based as well. Like if you're just acquiring the words. My acquisition of that word was, I guess, complete in Argentinian Spanish, but then for like Spanish from, you know, mainland Spain, like I didn't recognize it. It's another thing to be aware of.
Just starting out or trying to speak for the first few times. To get through these different stages of language learning, you have to take somewhat of a light approach where you're okay laughing at yourself and looking like a fool, including when you get an 18% on your self-imposed final exam. I know
Bro, I am constantly laughing at myself. My community's constantly laughing at me. In fact, people constantly shitting on me in Reddit and stuff because they're like, look how badly he's doing it in Spanish. But, you know, learning a language, and if you're honest about it, like, we're all shit. You know, at some point, especially in the early days. And I kind of find that fun.
this isn't the case for everyone, but for me, since language learning is a hobby, I can learn at my own pace, so feeling like a fool is just part of the game. The results of this challenge do temper my optimism about an input-only approach, but thinking back to...
I got so much to say on an input-only approach. And I've said it many, many times. An input-only approach is... It is not efficient, guys. It's not efficient. You are really fighting with one arm behind your back. But I have to say this as well. If it's what you enjoy and you do not vibe with studying, you can't do this. At the end of the day, the best way forward is to do the thing that you actually enjoy and are able to do day in, day out until you learn the language, okay? But if we're just talking from a perspective of efficiency, input only is not efficient. I've already seen that for myself. I've proven that to myself. Like, I know that for a fact now.
When I learned German, I used exposure to the language through native content using dual subtitles, and it really made a difference. A solid foundation for my vocabulary comes from videos like the ones that I watched for this challenge. But for a few weeks before I started with this input-heavy approach, I spent time with a German textbook trying to understand some of the foundations of the language. For this video, I was curious to see what would happen if I skipped that first step and just relied on input alone without explanations.
Okay, anyway, so that was a good video. It's actually quite fascinating. Even with a 7-day experiment, I could predict his results before seeing the video, just based on obviously my own experience. So this is definitely a good video. I love the use of data. Go check out his channel, give him a sub. I'm gonna sub to him now. And by the way, while you guys are here, sub to me, because a bunch of you probably aren't even sub, but you see my videos day in, day out. And I'll see you all in the next video. And if you're not there, well then, I'm going to expose you to me 20 times in a row.